Victoria. So she said that Melbourne is one of the best cities in the world. It's ranked the highest. And India is a country where cities are a huge problem. In fact, according to the global risk reports, urbanization in South Asia is possibly the highest challenge which is happening. And in this kind of a backdrop, I have some exhibits as well. For example, this is an air quality mask, and this is an actual notice sent by the National Green Tribunal to one of the establishments in Delhi. So we would come across these things in our presentation. We would actually first start with a video. Have we got the YouTube going? Not yet? Okay, so, so it's a combination of one video, two presentations, and a kind of a game which we'll play in between to understand the problem. Has anyone here heard of an economist called Douglas North? Douglas North was a Nobel laureate, and he started something called New Institutional Economics. So he has some very interesting things to say, and I'd borrow some of his things from him. So I have got the presentation here. Maybe we start with it. Okay, so
just another student we really like.
Yeah. So his entry actually marks a very good point because we are going to find out, will India become a new superpower? So that's a 11-minute video. So, but it sets a very interesting backdrop. So let's. Actually, we don't have.
Oh, this one?
There is a.
Yes. This one?
Yeah, it can play.
Should I try that one?
However, India is a stranger in political terms. If I was asking you who's the Prime Minister of India, could you tell me?
Put the microphone next to it.
Oh, here we go. That's working, that's one. It's coming out of somewhere though.
Yeah, now it's there.
I don't know why I'm doing this. At least check that here.
Then the YouTube button.
Yeah.
Try the YouTube
Oh,
button.
YouTube, yeah.
In conclusion, turn India into a superpower capable of competing with China on an economic, most populated country on earth. As the 7th biggest economy, has one of the 10 biggest military budgets in the world, and is a nuclear power. However, India is a stranger in political terms. If I were to ask you, who's the Prime Minister of India, could you tell me? Now, I am aware that many of you will actually know this, especially if you're watching this video from India. But if you don't know who the Prime Minister of India is, don't worry, because, well, that happens a lot. On the 26th of May, 2014, after an absolute majority, which has not been seen in 30 years, Narendra Modi became the Modi's mission? Well, it was clear. Boost growth, investment, and create millions of jobs. In conclusion, turn India into a superpower capable of competing with China on an economic, political, and military level.
चीन के साथ भारत के कोई एक समस्या नहीं, कई समस्याओं का ढेर पड़ा है।
Now, India, dear visual-politic viewers, is something of an eternal promise. It's always that country that seems to be the next one that's going to take off, but it never really does. We can see that this is definitely the case if we take a look at India's GDP and compare it to that of China. We've seen quite different economic development in the last few decades. So with Modi's victory, expectations are once again high and India has again become the talk of the town. Modi is repeating over and over again that the 21st century is going to be India's century. But before we get into all of that, let's take a look at Modi himself.
Who is Narendra Modi?
Vegetarian, single and a yoga enthusiast, Modi escapes the traditional politician profile. He comes from a family of limited means and when he was a child used to have his father sell tea in a train station. This has helped him earn the sympathy of many poor people in the country. They see him as an example of a rags to riches story and shows that rags to riches in India can sometimes work. His political ideology has always been very attached to Hinduism, and he has not always taken a moderate approach. In fact, before getting involved with the BJP party, he was involved with the RSS party. The RSS party is an extreme right party that had Mahatma Gandhi's assassin as one of its members. For 13 years, between 2001 and 2014, Modi was the regional prime minister in the state of Gujarat. Gujarat, with its 65 million inhabitants, has become, under Modi's leadership, India's greatest economic driver with an annual growth rate of 10%. Alongside these impressive figures, social welfare has also greatly improved. Almost every home has access to plumbing, electricity, and preschool education. While the general election in India was taking place, Modi promised to replicate what he'd done in his state in the rest of India. Furthermore, he promised to do this in just 10 years, which is only 2 political terms.
क्योंकि मुझे लगता है इस देश के दुनिया हमसे पीछे थी वो काफी आगे निकल अभी उसके साथ मैच करने के लिए हम बहुत दौड़ते हैं
This is because, for Modi, the year 2022 is a landmark year. It's the 75th anniversary of India's independence. The country will also surpass China as the world's most populous country, reaching a population of 1.6 billion people. Modi says that by the year 2022, it's going to be clear that the 21st century is India's century. But this is certainly not going to be easy, especially in a country where the population is growing by 28 people every minute.
India's major problems.
Now, India has many problems, but three do stand out as particularly important. The first is that India is a bureaucrat's paradise. In fact, if bureaucracy was the key to prosperity, India would probably be the most prosperous country in the world. Unfortunately, though, bureaucracy, instead of encouraging business, actually prevents it.
Gadkari has blamed the Indian bureaucracy for putting roadblocks in the growth of Indian economy.
According to the Doing Business report from the World Bank, which estimates how easy it is to do business, India occupies the 130th position. Each step of the way to establishing a business in India takes a ton of documents, and then the taxes are not only high, not that anyone really pays them, but they are also a nightmare to sort out. For example, there are not only different taxes in each individual state, but there are sometimes different taxes for each individual product or different models of the same product.
Yes.
This is something that commonly happens with vehicles, and it is a real nightmare for anyone to work out.
प्रोसेस इतनी कठिन होती है और एक बार इस चक्कर में पैर पड़ गया तो पता नहीं कब निकलेंगे पैर
Further, absenteeism among public workers has reached such a critical state that some hospitals have been forced to close temporarily because of the lack of staff. The second big problem is that regulations in the marketplace make it so complicated that the market is barely able to function. On the borders between different states, you'll find trucks that are just queuing to cross the border. Not a few people say that it's actually easier to import something from abroad than it is to get something from another state. Further, there is the terrible state of the country's infrastructure as well. As a consequence of this, it is estimated that half of the country's harvest goes to waste every year because of these delays. And the third big problem is that corruption is a big issue in Indian society. As a quick example of this, it is estimated that 50% of all the money that the government gives for welfare either ends up in the hands of corrupt politicians or middlemen. And so this is the country that Modi is having to deal with.
The new government policy.
The revolution that some have suggested has not yet taken place. However, the truth is that the government has achieved some notable advances. For example, we could highlight the following. In order to reduce bureaucracy, the government has created a committee with the purpose of determining which rules and regulations are obsolete and should be eliminated. So far, they've done away with more than 1,700 of these rules. Modi has also eliminated many restrictions on foreign investments. He has passed the first bankruptcy law and has set up a powerful plan to make India a destination for businesses. He has also set forth an ambitious plan for better financial inclusion. This plan has a pretty unpronounceable name, so I'm just going to show it on the screen now. And this plan has basically allowed for people to have a bank account for the first time. The number of people who've taken this up is about 200 million, and this basically means that that welfare money that is coming from the government doesn't have to go through any middlemen. Further, the government has also put forth a plan to simplify the very complicated tax system, having a flat sales tax at the national level. Modi has also announced that they're going to be spending a lot of money on infrastructure, with $130 billion being spent on rail by 2020.
So again, this year's plan is to really connect a lot of these small towns and cities to the main national highway. And the target of the government is to construct 10,000 kilometers of road every year.
But these aside, Modi's most risky move so far happened in November of 2016.
India's cash crisis.
In order to combat corruption, India suddenly made the country's 500 and 1,000 rupee notes illegal. These represented 85% of all of our cash in India, a country that is really a cash-based economy. The goal was to find dirty money and punish it when the owners came into the bank to switch out their 500 and 1,000 notes for ones in a new design. However, the plan was an utter disaster. The government didn't have enough cash to replace the money that people wanted to exchange. Further, the country's ATMs weren't working properly because the new currency was a different shape to the old currency and the ATMs hadn't been adjusted.
I don't know what to do. People here have no money to buy my products, so I can't buy stock from the market either. It's the end of my business.
This was a botched operation that left the country moneyless and caused significant damage to the economy. Sales fell in November by more than 30%. Many businesses simply weren't able to pay their workers, and many business transactions had to be cancelled. Some studies estimate that the total damage was 2 points of India's GDP. This would mean that the banknote switch cost India $50 billion. And unfortunately, the poorest in the country were the hardest hit. Then the government tried to say that it was all part of some big plan to encourage people to use more electronic money. Ah, politicians.
Foreign policy agenda.
Now this is the field where the Prime Minister has really excelled. In his first year alone, he visited 19 countries. Despite the fact that he's only been in power for a short amount of time, he has achieved some notable advances. The Pakistan Treaty has improved India-Pakistan relations, and their relationship with China has started dealing with some economic and commercial issues.
At a joint press conference, President Xi Jinping announced $20 billion worth of investment in India's infrastructure in 5 years.
However, without any doubt, the greatest strength of Modi's political agenda has been his approach to the United States. The chemistry between Obama and Modi has been quite significant, and their encounters have been frequent and friendly. They have both even published an article together in the Washington Post. So what we really need to ask now is, will Modi achieve his goals? There are certainly a great deal of challenges that he is going to have to overcome. For example, it's been made clear to the Prime Minister just how tricky it is to put limits on bureaucracy. Further, Modi has avoided many essential reforms, such as ending India's labour regulation, which has meant that 4 out of every 5 jobs in the country are on the grey market. Modi claims to be an admirer of Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore's ex-Prime Minister, but Modi doesn't seem to have the same drive or determination to transform India's model. So this is just our opinion here at Visual Politics, and we would love to know what you think. Do you think that the 21st century is going to be India's century? Do you think that Modi is going to achieve all that he has set out to achieve? Do let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Also, please do give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe to get new videos every Monday and Thursday. And as always, I'll see you next time.
Okay. The essential idea is there's a thing that you should travel. Okay. And the reason for traveling is that then you would know how everyone was wrong about that place. Okay. So the thing is that this is his perspective of India, and there is a kind of a saying in Hindi Urdu which says हजारों ख्वाहिशें ऐसी कि हर ख्वाहिश पे दम निकले. Okay, am I right in saying I'm okay in that? My mother tongue is not Hindi. My mother tongue is Bengali. Okay, and I was born and brought up in Calcutta, but for the last 20 years I've been in Delhi, barring few, one in Bombay and two in Amsterdam. So. So essentially, I would now get into the first presentation, which is completely on CSR. So the first dot is what is India. So this kind of video kind of is a narrative, a first world narrative of what is India. Okay, and it is potentially always rising, but it's never getting there. Now the second presentation is not a video; it's actually a PPT, which is on the CSR Act of India. Okay, so this one?
What is the one
Okay. Our video master has to considerably walk around. And the whiteboard is there. So this is essentially a very good Indian plan. So it's kind of things which are completely not structured, and you'll see that happen quite a lot. Okay, so this presentation is only on the act. Okay, India is one of the rare countries which has an act for CSR. Okay, let's see what that is. Okay, first, what is the definition? The World Business Council for Sustainable Development, WBCSD, defines CSR as the continuing commitment by business to contribute to economic development while improving the quality of life of the workforce, their families, as well as of the community and society at large. That's CSR. However, according to the Indian Act, spending money to improve the quality of life of the workforce and their families is not CSR. Okay? It is basically for the community and the society at large. The Act essentially says, or the two principal guidance of the CSR Act of India is that you have to spend money to improve the quality of life of the community which is adjoining a factory. So it's essentially to include those kind of people and society at large. Okay. The second thing is the CSR Act essentially looks at really poor people. Okay. And India has a very sizable population of really poor people. Okay, so why do we need it? This is kind of well known, but few pointers: improves public image, gives tax benefit for the company's view, generates brand awareness, increase in customer participation, better employee participation. All of them can be proved both empirically and theoretically. From a governance point of view, helps in eradication of social enemies with private involvement, increases public spending, works for upliftment of society. So these are, and this is essentially a very rare thing, or possibly the only country in the world where the CSR Section 135, Chapter 9, Companies Act 2013, it was passed. Okay, so that's the legal aspect of it, that all companies, that this is in the Companies Act 2013, okay, that these things are mentioned. So you, in fact, in the reading list, you will find the full act itself has been shared with you. Okay. So this is an important thing. Crore is a thing which you'll, crores and lakhs is something which you'll continuously find in India. Lakh is 10 to the power 5, crore is 10 to the power 7. Just for you to recollect, million is 10 to the power 6. So that's the thing. So a crore is just 1 0 more than a million, and a lakh is 1 0 less than a million. Okay, so companies with net worth greater than equal to 500 crores qualify to have a CSR policy, or they must abide by the CSR law. Turnover greater than, that is your summative revenue, greater than 1,000 crores. Net profit greater than 5 crores. So this is what allows you to have it. That means any company which has net worth more than 500 crores Indian rupees, turnover greater than equal to 1,000 crores Indian rupees, and net profit greater than 5 crores, you have to abide by the CSR Act. That means you must have a CSR policy. Now, the other thing is that you must have a CSR committee. I was myself a part of a CSR committee of one of India's fastest growing banks. And so I kind of understood how it was evolving. In fact, I was there in 2014. So the act got passed, and we were kind of the first people to get into the CSR policy. So the committee is essentially around 3 people who will formulate a CSR policy. It has to be a long-term. So program approach is what they talked about. Recommend the amount of money for the expenditure. So it is 2% of your profits, okay? 2% of your profits, which is taken as an last 3 years average kind of a thing. Okay, formulate, recommend the expenditure to regularly update the CSR policy. Where does the board stand? Approval of CSR policy, ensure regular activities are being done. So the board, essentially like the company's board, will then only look into the CSR policies of that. Okay, how much to spend? I've just said that. 2 years of preceding 3 years average net profit. Okay, okay. Where preferably in the local area. Now this is an important thing. So my next kind of corporate governance tidbit is that how do you look at a local area and how do you craft an intervention? My biggest challenge was that how do you craft an intervention without getting negative feedback? The biggest problem with CSR interventions is, or in terms of corporate governance is, there are 3 parts of corporate governance, which is the economic or the environment side, the social side, and the governance side, is that you do an intervention and there's a negative feedback as a result of it. The biggest, so for example, the Tatas, when they did a CSR policy, and this is Ratan Tata, maybe you've heard of him, he said that CSR is, suppose you're giving money and people are getting used to that grant. But you have to stop that grant because you cannot give grants to everyone. So when you stop that, people, instead of saying that Tatas were a brilliant company, they become angry against the Tatas. So this has happened. So these are one of the fallbacks of these things. Therefore, the local area, how do you plan an intervention? It has become a very important thing. Another thing is, this is a very important thing, CSR has, in India, as a result of this act, is a question of how do you spend 2% of your profits. So the question of CSR is that, okay, I should look good, therefore I should spend 2% of my profits on something good. Essentially, corporate social responsibility has a completely different ethos. The CSR Act has gone against that ethos. The CSR, as if it is not the act. So now a major thing is that the legal intervention itself has completely destroyed the ethos of CSR. Why? CSR is not how to spend your profit. CSR is how you make your profit. what is the businesses, or what are the businesses by which you make your profit. I'm sorry, I am an Elon Musk fan. Anyone here who's an Elon Musk fan? Okay, so you can understand that there is one person who has substantially contributed that how you make your profit. You can be a billionaire, but how you become a billionaire is a more important thing. Rather than I am a billionaire digging coal, sorry. But I don't want to starve, but still, for those of you who understood the underlying trauma in my mind, congratulations to you. Okay, so the point over here is that we have to make the profits better. One very important thing is, including if you're digging coal in India, a very important law has been passed, which is corollary to this, which is 20% of the equity of the mining company has to go to the tribals where the mining is happening. How do you do that? Okay, even in that case, the 20% of the equity, who's the owner of that equity? That normally becomes a district magistrate, etc. So when you go granularly, you will find that there are various problems which happen. So a major part of my presentation is how do you solve this local area problem, okay? You have identified an area, but how do you solve it? Right now, the CSR policies is like, okay, I'm going to give some money towards women's empowerment, whatever that means. I'm going to give money for Swachh Bharat, because India is the citadel for open defecation. Now, Swachh Bharat is essentially that. It's a very weird thing that that conversation is happening right now. After 60 years of independence or whatever. So, but good thing about Modi is that he did that. But very weirdly, you will find out, much to the anger of my the person who's taking the video, is if I draw the map of India. Okay, it's something like this. Actually, this is a little larger. So it's something like this. So this is your northeast. This is North India. These are the two states of UP and Bihar. Okay. Now, these two states are essentially a kind of an outlier. Okay, and there are enough number of things. There's a paper which I've written. Data from Rice University, USA, where they did a district map. So they looked at open defecation statistics throughout India. They basically found that the two states which were huge outliers to the world thing, that is they practice open defecation a lot, are basically these two states. These two states are huge outliers. There are 300 million people, 100 million people. They make up 400 million people. And this one in particular has a huge birth rate and fertility rate as well. Whereas most of other India is at the global fertility rate or less, but this state is much higher than that. And these two states together have a huge, they all have the human indicators which are wrong. Okay, and because they are so huge in size, it pulls India backward. Okay, whereas the entire other part of India is much more developed. For example, Kerala is an amazing example. Only state, possibly another northeast states also have that, where the female to male ratio, the female is higher than the males. Rest of India is really bad. One of the worst is Delhi. Delhi NCR is one of the worst, Punjab, Haryana, etc. They all suffer from that female feticide and things like that. So these two states are a particular kind of a problem. Another thing is that all states in India, they're states in India because they speak a different language. My gods are very different, though we are all Hindus mostly. My god is a very different concept of Hinduism than people over here. For example, there is a time called Navratri. Okay, So that is during October normally. So rest of India turns vegetarian during that time. Bengal turns ferociously non-vegetarian that time. Okay, we put fish into everything, including our vegetables. So we are ferociously non-vegetarian, and we are Hindus as well. So you have to understand one very important thing, which is that every part of India is very different. So putting on that local angle is very important. You cannot say like, India has a very bad statistics with respect to women. No, India doesn't, because this state or these states are very different to these states. They have possibly a much better work ethic than Bengal does, okay, where we spend a huge amount of time striking. So, okay, that's our motto. Okay. So South India, for example, they're completely different work ethics, completely different things. And what we have found out is, which is something which I'm going to talk about in the next presentation, is that we have to understand the central problem is identification of a local area, and how do you then figure out the local area problems. Okay, now I'll go back. I'll skip this because this is actually just the process of doing that, then the policy steps. I'm just waiting for the last slide over here, which comes in very nicely. I can share these things. These are all available. Any documentary on CSR will tell you these things. But the ones which won't tell you is, I have identified the problem, which is the local area assessment is the biggest problem in CSR. Okay, this is why I was waiting. It's an incredible curtain designed by one of my students who's insisted on having that thing happening. So thank you. This is the first presentation. Now the thing which I was trying to tell you was, you got India, you got an act which is not working. As you can understand, the act has taken away the focus of CSR, which is how you make your profits, to how you spend 2%. Are you getting this? This has caused more problems than anything else. Plus, the act itself has gone into very granular things, saying that you must form a committee. So it's essentially become more bureaucratic. You're going to spend more money on useless things. Okay? So the act has not served the purpose which it wanted to. Now, this is a very important thing. Most people will not say this in open, but you will find enough media reports saying that the Indian CSR Act is not the way forward. Now, this is very important because in sustainable development, all these challenges, all interventions normally backfire, including the most important intervention, UNFCCC. Anyone has heard of it? UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. That's basically an annual party which happens at different parts of the world. I went to the party in Durban. So all these climate change negotiators, they go to different parts like Cancun, Bali, etc., and they fly annually. So 180 countries flying annually to these exotic locales, and it has not served anything. And the biggest roadblock is half the population of USA, okay, because they never adhere to the conventions, so that's a problem. Now, what I'm trying to tell you is that, When you look, in fact, this is there in your in the abstract which I sent, that you have a global government regime, you have a national government regime. In India, you have states, okay, which are subnational, and then you have local. Now, a very important thing or very important distinguishing factor between a developed country and an underdeveloped or emerging economy. That is, there was a survey conducted, and it's called the world's, but anyway, I don't remember, but the finding is very important, which is, in developed countries, they thought very highly of their developed countries. Developed countries, they thought very highly of their local institutions. Very good. Police, amazing police. Local amenities, water supplies, etc. Very good. But they did not think very highly of the national government. Okay? All developed countries. Now, when you look at developing economies, they normally tend to think very highly of their national governments, but extremely poorly of their local governments. Extremely poorly. So much so, when my wallet was stolen in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, I went to a police station in Ethiopia and I felt very comfortable as if it was Delhi. The police station mimicked. There was really, and it is said that if there is a crime happening in a neighborhood in a developing economy versus a developed economy, the developed economy, the police will catch the thief in 2 days, and a developing economy, the police know of the thief 2 days prior. Okay? So these things are true. You would, and when I walked in, I knew that the police knew who had taken my wallet, and very weirdly, it had 2,000 US dollars. And I knew that he's going to be a very rich person, the person I was interacting with. Because he knew of the person, he knew how much money there was, and I knew that I will not get it back. So this local governance is my challenge. And local governance in India is a much bigger challenge because there is no India. India does not exist. Each neighborhood, we have assessed 200 neighborhoods in Delhi. Each neighborhood is different from the next one. The ethnicity of neighborhoods are different. The socioeconomic characteristic is different. So urbanization in India happens in a very different fashion. I do not know how many of you have been to New York. Have you been, anyone here been to New York? In New York, there's a Bangladeshi area called Jackson Heights. Okay, so if you speak Bengali, you will go to New York in Jackson Heights. And once you enter Jackson Heights, you would think that you are in an Indian city. Okay, so essentially you can replicate that. So the point over here is that the ethnicity, etc., these are very important parameters and we need to address that. Now, how do we do that? I would need 2 volunteers. One on that side and 1 person from this side. Maybe just for the logistics case, you're the volunteer from this side, my left, and the right. No, you can sit. Okay. I need you to see this number and say nothing. Okay? I will ask you, then you can say. Okay?
Okay. Oh, I said something.
Right? Okay. What's the number you saw?
6 and
9. So now this is a very, most of you possibly have heard of this, right? The problem is the interpretation. The interpretation is that, look, use from your vantage, okay, I've lost the number, sorry. No, it's okay. We'll figure it out. Yeah, I'll rewrite it again. Okay, you saw a 9, right? So this is how it goes. From this point, you see a 6. From that point, you see a 9. Now, this is a concept of deep uncertainty, which is very relevant. And this is also a problem with institutional formatting. Suppose, say, people here are seeing it from an Indian perspective. Okay? And Indian perspective is very chaotic, etc. We do not know what is right. Okay? The perception is we do not know. Where the Indian cities are really bad. and here is an Australian perspective, and they have Melbourne, which is the best city. They have seen a 6. Here, she's seen a 9. Immediately, we would think her perspective is right because her background says that her perspective is right. She'd say, no, your perspective is not right because your background suggests it's not right. Now, the problem is that a lot of our developing economy strategies are determined till now by an institution called World Bank. Okay? It is a huge thing. The World Bank gives the start financing to every major project, including, say, smart cities. Okay. Now, the World Bank normally comes like, I'm seeing a 6. They will disregard an Indian perspective, which is a 9. Now, the point over deep uncertainty is that she has to come over, at the same time she has to come over. Till now, what has been happening in the narrative is that the World Bank has seen a 6, please call your Indian bureaucrats, see, it's a 6, it was never a 9. Come from my side, see it, it's 6. World Bank and the developed world has never crossed the other side to see, oh, it is also a 9. Okay, so now this is a very important thing. For example, our city planning has been done in accordance to plans which were by people who have studied in US, Europe, or Australia. Okay, so they have that lens. They don't see that the culture is a dimension. I mentioned Douglas North. Douglas North is an economist who is famous for saying that formal and informal institutions, both are important to make a market economy run. This perspective, her perspective of 9, is the sum total of the informal information, the informal institution, the belief, the culture. She sees it as a 9. We don't see cities, we see neighborhoods, we see societies, we don't see cities. So if you look at the map of India in terms of cities, there are no cities actually, there are urban agglomerations, huge urban agglomerations. We don't look at cities as a box item, that this is a city. We don't adhere to that. Our mapping of urban areas is not similar to others. Okay, our cultural practices are different. Our neighborhood centricity is much more. For example, the oldest city in the world apparently is Varanasi, which is essentially a religious conglomerate. Okay, it is not a city in that way. Each temple has a complex and they have a method of functioning. The rules of each temple is different from the rules of the next one. Okay, if you go to Varanasi, the ashrams were like that. Okay, our method is the guru will decide the norms of that place. Each city has a norm. You cannot standardize it. Each neighborhood has a norm. And another very important thing which I will not delve too much into, but kind of allude to, is something which is essentially the cultural contexting. Okay, how do you put on the cultural context is a very important thing. Anyway, I think if I go to the next presentation, it will be a good one. We have a TED talk on this as well. So if you search for my name, Arnab Bose, you would get a TED talk. It's a TEDx talk. Okay, so along with Seema, who's the founder and CEO of Resilience Relations, and so we have developed this. So what we are trying to do is, so hopefully I've told you what CSR Act is, okay, and we have told you one of the major dilemmas is crafting the policy with respect to corporate governance. Now I'm coming into the corporate governance aspect, that is, how do you craft your policy? So instead of saying that let's put some money into making toilets, don't do that. Each locality is different. You need to craft policy which is locality centric. The neighborhood is a very important manifestation in India. You cannot plan anything city-wise in India. You have to get on to the neighborhood or the local area perspective. So this particular presentation is how do you then do that. We are looking at smart cities, but smart cities is essentially a kind of a paradigm where every person here and outside in India needs some amount of energy, some amount of food, some amount of water, and how do you get them for everyone? You have to use information technology. You have to leverage technology for that. These are the four values: the physical infrastructure, the social infrastructure, the value infrastructure, and smart governance. Okay, this is how normally things are done all across the world. You know, it's a little bit of a top-down approach. Okay, including in Melbourne. Okay, so the governments essentially decide, the governments select an area, and they basically figure out what to do. There is some amount of stakeholder consultation, like over here. This has been done for the NDMC area, which is a smart zone. You know, face-to-face interaction, MyGov, social media, questionnaires, online, mobile, etc. So if you look at it, they have basically done stakeholder consultation. But is that the story? Now, I take you to Margaret Mead, possibly a person you've heard of, a person who started feminism, but she had a very interesting thing to say. What people say, what people do, and what people say they do are three different things. Okay, so this is a very important aspect. What people say is the interviews. What people say they do is your questionnaires, and what people do is your observation, is your participant observation. These are three different things. So if you could see, the stakeholder consultation being done in this format gives you only 1/3 of the truth. That's why all bus stops are kind of incorrectly designed. So let's see if we can show you a bus stop. Oh, we have. Okay. Now, I'm going to explain what people say, what people do, and what people say they do. Earlier, the buses were pretty high. So people were asked, what kind of bus stop do you want? So apparently in this questionnaire, they didn't think that buses can be low-floored. So they said, you know, why don't you make the bus top higher? Okay. What they really wanted to say was that I don't want to jump. You know, I want an easy access. So what has happened is this has become higher. And buses are not exactly like trains that they come to your platform. You have to get over in any case. Unless, of course, you're talking about bus rapid transport in Bogota, which is a different thing. Okay. So what happens over here is that most of the people, only one person jumped from here. Most people went over there because it's much narrower. But see, what happened in the questionnaire is that you thought that the people said, make it higher. That is not what they wanted. If you had observed how they were using the bus stops, you would have created a better narrative. You would have observed them. So that comes from ethnography and anthropology and those kind of things. So the point over here is that when you're crafting CSR policy, you have to observe people. You just cannot blatantly give a questionnaire and say that this is how this is what people said. Make the bus stops higher. That is not how it works. So if you had observed that people do not want to jump, then you should have made it lower. Now, one. Second thing is, people did not know that there can be low-floored buses, though this is not one of them. Majority buses in Delhi are low-floored. Okay, they are low-floored. So they did not know that solution could exist. So in the CSR policy, one very important aspect of the CSR policy, and it has a huge budget, it's a 40,000 crore annual expenditure. The method of crafting the CSR policy has to be via participant observation, not only questionnaires. I'm not saying questionnaires are bad, but I'm saying questionnaires are only giving you part of the insight. Only giving you part of the insight, and look at what this questionnaire has done. This questionnaire has essentially ensured that bus stops are designed like this. Thereby, all bus stops in Delhi are incorrectly designed. And you would find that a Mehroli bus stop and a Greater Kailash bus stop are very different from each other. You have to make them differently. And as a result of this, bus usage has fallen drastically. So your last mile, which could have been done via the bus, has completely gone away. On the other hand, if you look at Delhi Metro, it's incredible. Acha, the final thing. Look, this is a ramp for people possibly with wheelchair or walking disabilities, and you walk up and hit a billboard. This essentially is user experience. The problems are multidimensional. You know, everything is kind of interconnected, and because people are using less buses, people are using their vehicles more. Diesel exhaust is category 1 carcinogen, and very soon a mask will become a standard feature. So your bus usage, your air quality, your water quality, your municipal waste, they are all interlinked. Plus, when we went to one of the, let me show you actually, one of the places, sorry for hurrying things up, but Sean has given me 30 minutes less time. So you can blame it on him. So this is an article which Seema and I wrote with 2 other people. There, for example, he's Ernst & Young, he's Yes Bank, I was Yes Bank myself. Seema was PricewaterhouseCoopers, right now she's in University of Delhi. So all of us wrote this thing called Plugging the Implementation Gap, an Indian case on bridging the disconnect between global climate change regime and local area. But a very important method. Okay, so what I'm saying is, then how do I assess a local area? How do I figure out what is my intervention? Most of my interventions have a negative consequence. So this is how I look into my assessments: individuals, community, local areas, local administration, state government, national government. As you can see, your locality to the global climate regimes or global governance regimes, they are being taken care of in one go by a participatory stakeholder assessment. And this is called the inspire stage, which is you figure out options for these things. So a mechanism, this is 2, which is keep options alive. Let me explain them a little later if I have time. So these are the processes of figuring out or participant observation. Our key players is community, academia, industry, which has the money, the CSR money, and policymakers, because they basically prepare the rules of the game. So these are the 4 actors who are always very important. First things we do is we create a baseline. So I have told you that local area is the most important area, and I need to figure out how to craft an intervention at that local area. So I have figured out my 4, these were my 4 actors who were very important. and then I get on to the creating a baseline. Okay, first is I should know the place. So the baseline is you create a resilience atlas, storytelling, okay, psychometric tests, etc., which is there, green assessments, employability assessments. So you create a baseline involving the academia. You figure out, okay, this is the neighborhood, this is what we should do. Second is the neighborhood interventions, police-public partnerships, we have all done these things, community walks, community videos, employment mapping. Then you come to expert interventions. One of the expert interventions is creation of an app. So this is the app, which is a neighborhood app. Okay, for example, Indrapuram, North Campus, Vivek Vihar, Cyber City. These are 8 neighborhoods which have been chosen. And if you go into any one of them, you get into a notice board. The best thing about this app is that it can handle artificial intelligence in terms of images, and it is built in terms of the incentive scale, is built on blockchain. Okay, there are a few cryptocurrencies which can be worked out. I hate cryptocurrencies, but blockchain is awesome. Okay, so expert interventions are the digital community which we are creating via this, and full policy interventions is when you're changing the laws with respect to CSR as well. So the Schedule 7, whatever you have it, first, and what we are trying to advocate is instead of having a Schedule 7, have a local area approach, which is much better in terms of long-term robust policies. Okay, we follow various things which is called ethnography. Non-invasive learning method is also a very interesting method, and the financial gradients concept, which if I have time, I can explain that, which is very important for CSR actually. So these are the 3 stages. These are all the interventions in the photographs you can see. And this is one of the communities, the storytelling thing. This is in Vivek Vihar, which has one of the world's worst air quality problems in terms of an urban space. And when we asked the stakeholders, is air quality a problem? It was not even in their top 20. Their biggest problem was stray animals. Stray dog attacks on kids. Then we checked, Delhi has 3 lakh stray dogs. 20,000 rabies deaths in India happens as a result of that. There's a hospital in India which gives vaccines against rabies to 5,000 people every month. Okay, and a lot of deaths do take place, 22,000 deaths take place as a result of that. So the point is, we think that, as a policymaker, we think air quality is a big issue in that area, but actually their issue is very different and it is very important to them. So if the government doesn't address their issues, they will not align with the government either. So this is a very important learning which we had. So we pushed ahead with air quality champions. So telling them these are important issues as well. Stray dogs is a waste management issue. The government has to take a call on how to do it. London had a similar issue decades ago. It did resolve it. We can adopt a similar method. A lot of our communication happens in English, but if you look into communications being made in Hindi, you would reach a much wider audience. In fact, the internet penetration in India, the major bottleneck is local languages. And it is not Hindi in India. Hindi is just few of the states. Then you have Punjabi in North, in Punjab. And if you South Indian states have their own languages. And each state actually has a different language. And maybe more than one language. These are some of the things which we have been able to do. And this is the Resilience Atlas. So we are asking people, so if you use this app, you can also you can do a psychometric test on the app. You can rate your locality. This is Indirapuram. So these are very interesting thing. One of them is called child friendliness. That's a very important kind of a parameter, because once you start looking at a city or any neighborhood actually, it can be in the village areas as well, from a child's perspective, lot of lot of things get covered. Okay, lot of aspects like water availability, open spaces, etc. They get covered. As soon as you think of a child-friendly place, you think about open spaces, and when you put in open spaces, a lot of other things also get covered in that narrative. This is the police-public partnership, which we kind of did. This is with the district magistrate. So this is a method for CSR. Okay. In fact, design for sustainability is a thing which both University of Delhi and OP Jindal Global University together, we have formulated a CSR proposal. Okay. We are formulating a CSR proposals, and we want CSR to be governed by these kind of things. So the corporate governance element should be this. The CSR Act is going actually pretty much away from what it wanted or what corporate social responsibility should be. So a continuation, this is the proposal which we are making for Delhi NCR. Okay. So these are the colleges which are aligning with us. OP Jindal Global University is looking at the Delhi NCR regions in Haryana. This is the app, the picture of the app. So all these neighborhoods will come under this. You can create your narratives around that. Okay. So the only thing which I haven't covered is financial gradients. But before I do that, I would take, say, 10-15 minutes. We have approximately a half an hour left. So maybe first I take in questions if you have any, particularly with respect to CSR. If not, I will get into financial gradients. Any questions? It was overwhelming. So anyone here who wants to say a few things about the major learning of and how do you look at it from an Australian perspective? Anyone? So what are the cities, or where do you come from? Any one person can possibly start. How about you? Anyone? Yeah.
Both from Melbourne.
Okay, excellent. So do you think Melbourne is a good place to take Indian bureaucrats to? We have a session at 3 o'clock to decide amongst 3 cities: Singapore, Melbourne, and Berlin. Singapore is hands down?
Yeah.
She's from Singapore.
Okay, Singapore is hands down. Okay, who's taking the side of Melbourne? Melbourne, okay. So what are the arguments for Melbourne? So why should we take Indian bureaucrats to Melbourne? It is the #1 city, by the way, in terms of livability. Go ahead.
Just take them to an economy class, save money.
Okay. No, but what about Melbourne?
Yes, well planned. And they will learn a lot of things like they need to learn here.
Okay.
Like management, not corruption free too. And things works without jugaad. They all know jugaad. So you don't need jugaad there. Like, you understand jugaad?
Yeah, I understand Jugaad pretty well. So, okay, like I have Jugaad, the presentations. Anyway, so what about Melbourne? So what do you think is good about Melbourne?
In terms of infrastructure, I think Singapore actually has the edge on Melbourne.
Okay.
We're getting there. Well, at least our CBD is a grid, which is a good start, and there's some good initiatives for public transport, but they're not as efficient or economical.
I guess Singapore's system's completely different to India's. So I guess with their, I think the property, it's mainly owned by the government, and then they lease it out to people in Singapore, and that's how they make their revenue. So if you want to come to a city that operates similar to India but successfully, then I guess Melbourne's the best way to go.
If I make the statement that Singapore is not a democracy, am I incorrect? It's not a democracy, right?
I mean, we have elections. But like the fact that one party...
I know that China also has elections.
Yeah,
But
the
anyway.
fact that one party works really well, that's kind of like, you know how you set cultural context? So one party in Singapore has done so much for us, and for the people. and they work really well. And the reason we get so much FDI and everything is because of our political stability. So just it's kind of stupid to have like an opposition party like in power just for the sake of it when your current party is doing really well. But yeah, I mean, that being said, the reason everyone thinks Singapore is a pseudo-democracy, but I mean, freedom of speech definitely is like definitely an issue, but as far as like political parties are concerned, I reckon the PAP is pretty alright.
Okay.
But that's just my opinion.
But I think Australia is a democracy in terms of that it's not a single party rule. So Australia is a better alignment with India. So the other one is Germany, which I don't think can align with any other country, but it is very different in terms of German public finance efficiency and things like that. It was said that in Germany, there are 3 public finance funded things which did not work. Okay, there are 3 things, like the Berlin airport is one of them. Okay, the 3 things which did not work. And in India, there are 3 things which work. Okay, so Delhi Metro is one of them. So you should check these institutions in these perspective. And from an Indian perspective, is CSR a good thing at the moment? 2014 was when it started. 20 right now we are in 2018, but the thing is that the CSR Act as itself, it has changed over time, and there is an incredible amount of money which is getting parked over there, but the Act really needs to evolve. Okay, it really needs to evolve, and we need to figure out development for sure. The last thing which I'm going to say, which is important, is something called financial gradients. This is the last. Oh, and there is the NGT as well. Okay. These are principally the 4 kinds of capital, the nature of capital, which is floating around. The first one is grants. The second one is public finance. The third one is debt. And the 5th one is equity. Now, you have to understand that there is a full presentation, but I don't want to bore you with it. This usually in corporate finance, the financial ratios are with debt and equity. Entire corporate finance is a subject which only deals with these 2 sources of finance. But when it comes to sustainable development and CSR kind of things, CSR is supposed to be a grant. Okay? Okay? The problem with a grant is that it is not very efficient. In terms of efficiency, for example, this is the nature, and grants are very expensive as well. The reason is, suppose say if I give you $100, okay, as grant.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. $100. And I tell him to, your name is?
Elliot.
Elliot, do something good. Do something good for the poor in India. Okay? Elliot has got $100,000 US. Okay? That's, yeah. So Elliot has got $100,000. Do something good for the poor people in India. So what he would do is, 40% of the money would be to assess and track all the things which he is doing. 40%. So $100,000, $40,000 is essentially on his own tracking and things like that. Okay? Whereas if I give him $100,000 as equity and I'm a venture capitalist, he doesn't have to spend anything on tracking. He has to spend that entire money on the innovation he's bringing onto the table. He's not tracking because I am tracking on his behalf. It's my money. He has to give me at least 40% returns. So I have to figure out every week from him, what are you doing? But if I'm a grant giver, I don't have any such incentive. In fact, I'm going to waste my time because I already have burnt $100,000. I don't want to waste more time and more energy to figure out what he's doing. So to do sustainable development work and helping the poor, you have to convert grants to equity. The second important paradigm. Okay, grant giving to help poor is the most disastrous method possible to help poor. Okay, so you have to start companies by which for example, I tell him that I'm giving you an equity. you have to give me 40% return at the end of 1 year, but help poor people only. Now, Grameen Bank Bangladesh, microfinance, that was a kind of a solution. There is another bank in India which also made money by helping the poor. Anyone knows the name of that bank? It's called Bandhan Bank. Okay, it's a bank in India which is perfect example of CSR, because the profits it makes is correct profit. Not that it makes profit and then thinks about, okay, how do I do good to the society with 2% of the profits I've made. How Bandhan Bank makes money is by creating women entrepreneurs, basket makers, achar makers, pickle makers. Okay, so this is how Bandhan Bank has done it. They have made their money correctly. That is what corporate social responsibility should be about, not spending 2%. And grant, as I have told you, it's an extremely difficult and a wasteful method of helping poor. Okay, but the financial gradients essentially says that grants, though, are very important, especially when they are research-led. Because when you're trying out a new idea, okay, all research is carried out via research grants. Therefore, grants play an important role in first-hand philanthropy, because when no one else is going, you don't expect in return back. First-hand philanthropy or first-hand research. Okay. This is very important for grants. Public finance is extremely important to stabilize the ship. Okay? The American economy, which is essentially what we call something the Keynesian model, okay, where if there is a crisis, public finance has to play a role. So public finance is very important in terms of crisis, and public finance is also very important in terms of social dividend, which means majority of the people has to benefit. Otherwise, the ruling party, even if it is a one-party system, it won't survive. There will be a backlash. So the social dividend angle is a very important thing in public finance. Debt is long-term. Okay, banks hate it if you pay back your loan quickly. Okay, sorry, I don't want to pay back. Sometimes they can impose a fine if you pay back your tenure earlier, because they have calculated the cash flow like that. They've given you $100,000 and they expect $100 to come in every week or something of that sort. Okay, and first is equity. Equity's problem, the good thing about equity is its efficiency. So every sources of finance has something good, has something bad. CSR at the moment is completely grant, which is bad. What we are saying for sustainable development is that every project should have a combination of all four of them. Because if there is a combination of all four of them, then you can stabilize. So you can talk about innovative research, social dividend, long-term, efficient together. Okay, so for example, if you have a philanthropic grant giver like a Rockefeller Foundation maybe, public finance, the government of India, or sometimes it can be the government of Australia as well, which gives a lot of money in terms of renewable energy. It can be debt, okay, long-term borrowings. It can be multilateral debt, which, for example, Asian Development Bank, along with JICA, gave 50% of the money for phase 1 Delhi Metro. Delhi Metro's phase 1 was completely Japanese government funded debt, which was partly a public finance as well. And equity was also, the other 50% was in terms of equity by the government of India. So equity, and there can be equity players as well. For example, there are too many of them to name one. And right now there's a new breed of equity funding which is happening, which is essentially dependent on the nature of sustainability you bring into the table. So this kind of approach to finance is called financial gradients. Financial gradients actually is a critique of the Modigliani-Miller proposition. Anyone here who has studied finance? Okay. So the proposition is a very important thing, and financial gradients as a concept counters the Modigliani-Miller proposition, which basically says that the nature and sources of finance are irrelevant. the Modigliani-Miller proposition, but the full proposition is the nature and sources of finance are irrelevant so long the markets are efficient and information is symmetric. But because your markets are never efficient and your information is never symmetric, then the nature of sources of finance play an important role and are relevant. So this proposition has been put forward in the financial gradients paper, and this is how we have categorized finance in that sense. So CNAB, that app, has a financial gradients approach. Okay, so the first CNAB will only have grants in the first few years. Okay, then it will get into public finance. Okay, first grants, then public finance. Then it can have a debt model in some of its projects, and finally it will get into equity. Okay, so whereas your Facebook and everything else starts with equity. Okay, the start point is equity. That is where we want to change the paradigm of the information technology, which is grants are a good first start, but you have to quickly evolve to the other things. Okay, so grants alone, but CSR at the moment is only grant, nothing else. That is the kind of things which we are trying to say, that even if you want to park your money at 2%, why do you have to call it grant? You can call it equity as well. Just say that this is the nature of business, but whether it is grant or equity, that doesn't matter. Okay, so, okay, I am at 12:30, so which means that I have to quickly end. Okay, so I have given you, I'll do a little recap. The first things which I did was show you what is India. Show you what is India. Then we went on to the CSR Act. We showed you some of the problems with the CSR Act in India. Okay. Then we've provided a framework by which you can look into the CSR Act. And then we went into financial gradients as another problem area with the CSR Act. Sean, you'll be happy to know that I have actually officially ended.
Arnab. If you've got any questions, I'm sure Arnab's happy to linger around and answer them. You guys can look at your schedule for what's next.